on academic freedom. How many of you heard the term academic freedom before? It's a very collegiate associated idea. If you had to kind of explain it, what is it? Start with a definition.
Well, it's this idea that all ideas need to be examined. There's nothing off the table. And that you're free to pursue where the academics, where your studies would lead you.
Okay.
Now, you know, within a framework of understanding, you have. How do you know what you know? You have to start from a base. But the idea of academic freedom is just that. It is the freedom of a conscience. It's a religious idea.
That I think we'll see more and more.
Yeah.
It is a religious idea. Any other thoughts on how we might explain the idea of academic freedom? Rush. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, are you getting at the idea of a government forcing someone to go to school that they don't want to, or?
No, this really has to do more with especially in collegiate circles, the rights of professors to pursue research and teaching and writing, and what their freedom is in doing that. Dan?
With the word freedom, it can often be said as our freedoms are more like responsibilities. We have freedoms, but there are responsibilities. It could be said academic responsibility. It's your responsibility to check these things and to make sure you're speaking the truth and teaching the truth. And I don't know, what do you?
The academic freedom is a concept. And it's this idea that you aren't going to be forced into believing a certain way. That your conscience and your intellect, your research, all of it is being brought to bear on the subject at hand. And that you're free to conclude based upon your investigation. Unlike, for instance, environmental sciences, where you're not allowed to be, you're not free today to believe that there is no such thing as man-made climate change. You're not free to believe that. Well, that's ridiculous in institutions that proclaim academic freedom.
Exactly. So, Rushdoony points out the Columbia Encyclopedia's written definition of academic freedom as the right of scholars, namely professors, to pursue their research, to teach, and to publish without control or restraint from the institutions that employ them. So this is very specifically a right given to professors, to the scholars, to the researchers, people who are paid to do this.
Whenever somebody says rights given, the question is, given by whom?
Given by whom? So let's start there. Who gives them these rights? Rushdoony points out, gives a kind of a case study of a professor at Emory University, which used to be a Christian school, Episcopal, far removed from it now. And I think because of academic freedom, or their version of it. But in that instance, or take any college, university, community college, any higher learning institution, who gives the scholars this right? To pursue, to teach, to write with no interference from that institution. Themselves, they claim it for themselves.
Bylaws of the
Institution?
The bylaws of the institution. And I think that's the key, is the institution are usually the ones who formally acknowledge it. And thus gives these scholars somewhere to stand on, and claiming, well, I have a right to teach and write whatever I want, you can't do anything about it. Even though you pay me to do it.
This is where tenure, the idea of tenure is part and parcel of this.
Yes.
Tenure says I can't be fired from my job. I'm tenured. And so after a period of time of earning the respect of the institution that pays them, they are contractually tenured. There's a tension here in something like this where scholars are being paid by employers. Employers should have some sort of say over what it is that they can do, what they're getting paid for. A scholar is free to pursue his research and publication without restraint from anybody, as long as he's not getting paid by them, outside the institution. Inside the institution, there need to be some controls.
And that's where, you're right, that tension comes up between the institutions and between the scholars. But in almost every case, the scholars went out saying, we're supposed to have academic freedom. And they go to a definition like this, into an institution's bylaws, and then they have a foot to stand on when they want to teach something that's absolutely absurd. Dan?
We do have examples of people getting fired for academic freedom, but usually when they teach something that is in opposition to what a state school would teach or
Right, we'll see that come out a little bit later as well. This is very one-sided, this idea of academic freedom. When Rushdoony walks through this example at Emory University with this professor who's kind of gone off the deep end, he pulls out several presuppositions that he identifies based on that case study and this definition. The first is that academic freedom means, it has a meaning, that a teacher has the right to teach and write without any interference, even if his work is hostile to and subversive of the basic purpose of the school. So it's this idea of academic freedom typically is not based on any higher authority than the scholars themselves. They presuppose they have that right.
Saying that this is like good?
No, he is not arguing that this is how it ought to be.
Oh, okay.
He's actually going to make a counter-argument that we're also going to examine in much the same way. But he's saying this is what they presuppose, the scholars,
The modern-day
institution-
scholars.
modern-day scholars and the institutions that employ them are going to presuppose. They wouldn't necessarily say this, though some do. But this is kind of a foundational understanding that they assume is true with no further foundation, with no further examination.
Gotcha.
Everyone just kind of agrees to agree on it. I think, just based on the discussion here, this idea of without any interference perhaps is not a good thing. At the very least, it's unfounded. Where does this idea come from beyond the people wanting to claim the right and the institutions that are caving to it? So I think this is a presupposition that should be questioned at the very outset of it. And it is very, very foundational to the rest of it as well. Any thoughts on this presupposition? John?
One of the things about any institution, if it does not defend its purpose, if it doesn't defend its own rules, it won't stand for long.
Rushdoony makes that very point.
It can't. That's true of Christianity, which did not defend its rules and regulations, didn't defend the Bible, and so we have what we have today. It's true of America, which has not defended its Constitution and the true meaning of the words, And so, any school who puts up with that presupposition was not a school that'll be around for terribly long.
At least not in the form that it originally was founded.
No, I
I think we have schools that did start specifically as solid Christian schools. You've got Harvard, Yale, all those Ivy Leagues. But there's nothing Christian about them, and this is much of the reason why. Because there was no check or balance in what was taught in the classrooms that turned around to influence and affect policy. Stella?
Because the without any interference means that they can write the ungodly stuff.
Exactly. And that's what they started doing. And none of their bosses, none of the administrators would stop it. Any more thoughts on this idea, this presupposition? Next one is that it is actually a merit when any school permits, tolerates, and encourages such teaching, referring to presupposition number 1. It's a merit. It is considered a good thing when a school says, yes, we support academic freedom, we support the right of our professors to research, teach, preach, write anything they want with no interference from the administration.
Always right.
It's not. But it is viewed culturally as a good thing.
Sometimes it is when a person is doing ungodly writing, but there's more ungodly writing. That's happening.
Any thoughts on this presupposition?
Is the issue kind of similar to a pastor's right to preach his own conscience?
I think it's a similar principle at play. Yes.
Is the issue essentially the same? Because,
I think essentially, yes. Context is different.
yeah.
Yeah.
What I had said a little bit earlier, if you think then that a lot of people are reinterpreting or redefining the word freedom as to mean I can do as I please, instead of I am what I'm responsible to do.
Yes, that would absolutely be true. Particularly of modern scholars claiming this academic freedom. You never hear them talk about, well, I have a responsibility to the truth. They say, I have a right to say and do what I want.
Which they shouldn't.
Which kind of touches on what I was saying earlier. You then use your freedom to go to a different college, and when the enrollment at Harvard or wherever gets so low because people are saying, you have no standard here, we're going, maybe they would rethink their,
But that would have to be a cultural shift.
oh yeah.
Because go to any Joe Blow graduating high school, looking at colleges for a very academic career, is he going to say, I'm not going to go to Harvard if he had the chance because they support this idea of
Right.
academic freedom? No. They assume, they presume
That's a
that,
merit.
that it's a good thing that these
Right.
professors can teach what they want.
It's a merit, yeah.
It's a merit. So it would have to be a cultural shift for people to consistently start going, just because that they have this so-called academic freedom doesn't mean it's right. A third one that he pulls out. Those who refuse to support teaching which is subversive to their faith are guilty of suppressing opinions and are regarded as hostile toward liberty. You have a lot of schools that were specifically founded on Christian principles. And today, long since those foundings, if a school were to say, you know what, that professor does not teach in accordance with what we were originally founded to teach, they don't support these ideas, they're not propagating that same philosophy. In fact, just the opposite, they're undermining it. For an administration to say that they are then guilty of suppressing opinions. It's a bad thing. Is that a fair presumption?
How you define liberty. You know, James says that the word of God is perfect law and liberty. I think it's in James. Check me.
So,
I think that people should write godly things, but they should at least have a little bit of a choice.
you think they'd have a little bit of a choice? Perhaps. We'll talk a little bit more about that. We'll come back to that idea.
Another thing is that part of this has to do with even the word university, by its root, assumes a singleness of truth. University, veracity, right? It's a universal truth. And these ideas that you're putting up here are supportive of a multiverse.
Many truths. And that's where I think there has been either an ignorance or an outright turning of the definition of university, of academic freedom, of scholarship itself. Wes?
You know, if I'm at a Christian university and somebody's teaching pagan principles, I'm all about being guilty of suppressing his opinion. You know what I mean? I'm definitely suppressing his opinion as I should. You know? But as Mr. Bing said, it all depends on what hostile to liberty means.
Right.
You know?
Define liberty.
Right.
Fair enough. Dan?
In a university, the word opinion shouldn't even be on the roster, right? It shouldn't even be described by the professor as an opinion.
Right.
He's a professor, he should be professing what is the truth to you. If he's saying that's my opinion, well then, who cares?
Right. But under academic freedom, they can't be told that they can't.
Right, yes.
In fact, their opinion is truth in
Yeah,
their whole philosophy.
right,
Right, yeah.
because all opinions are valid, right?
Except ours. Except mine.
Fourth presupposition that Rushdoony pulls out in this case study. The basic function of any school is to encourage new ideas rather than to propagate old ones. To spread.
I think we should spread the old ones, but a few new ideas doesn't hurt as long as it's not other side.
So here would be my question for you, Stella. If an idea is old, does that make it necessarily a good idea or a bad idea?
It depends on what the idea is.
How?
Because even the old ideas are some worse ideas than others, some bad ideas, some good ideas. So it depends on the idea.
But not on the age of the idea. An old truth is still true, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where's this quote from?
This is Rushdoony.
This is Rushdoony,
Yeah.
and he's quoting someone else.
He's not quoting someone else. I'm quoting Rushdoony, and Rushdoony is making this point that this is a presupposition of modern academic freedom.
Okay.
So he's not supporting it, he's just stating it. He's laying it out.
Yeah.
Not saying it's a good thing. In fact, he's going to argue that it's not.
Right, because, I mean, if the whole idea is to encourage new ideas, then the idea you've just taught, by default, in time, is going to be wrong or already is wrong. Because in time, it will be replaced, so why teach it even now?
Right.
Why teach anything?
What's interesting to me is that this idea of new ideas being better than old ideas is not a new idea itself.
Yeah.
That idea itself. We see it in Acts chapter 17. This is when Paul goes to Mars Hill and says some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers also conversed with him, and some said, "What does this babbler wish to say?" And others said, "He seems to be a preacher of foreign divinities," because he was preaching Jesus and the resurrection. And they took him and brought him to the Areopagus, to Mars Hill, saying, "May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? For you bring some strange things to our ears. We wish to know, therefore, what these things mean." Now all the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there would spend their time in nothing except telling or hearing something new.
Well, even that idea is old, so they can't. So it doesn't make sense for them to say that because.
If they were consistent, yes. So we see this idea of always looking for something new, and that's what a school is for, is to find something new.
And that idea.
That's an old idea.
So
Would you say that it depends somewhat on the subject? Because if you take a subject like physics, very little of what was believed 100 years ago is still believed today.
Right.
What about things that are in constant flux, like science?
Right. Again, it depends on the subject matter and what the truth is. Thousands of years ago, everybody still believed in gravity. That hasn't changed. We might understand it a little better today, but the basic principles of gravity have not. You drop something, it hits the ground. So there are some old truths that are still true. But when you get into other subjects, say astronomy, we can look further out into the stars than we ever could before. So we have new telescopes, and that gives us an ability to see things further out and to understand them a little better. Has it changed any old truths, or is it simply added to what we understand?
Partly depends upon what, you're talking about old truths. You know, a couple hundred years ago, it was true that the moon was made of green cheese, right? I mean, everybody knows. So you have to be careful about what you consider truth. The Bible gives us truth, but not about physics. And so physics is a notebook, a loose leaf notebook. It's not bound like a Bible. The Bible, however, does give us timeless truth about morals, ethics, those kinds of things. It also gives us the truth about how we should investigate science.
Right. It gives us that framework.
The framework.
the Bible tells us the stuff that has always been and always will be, no matter how fancy high tech we get.
Yes, but it's also worth pointing out, the Bible is not a science book. Not that when the Bible addresses something scientific, it is correct. But the point behind the Bible is far more about morality, how we live life, how we investigate things, how we come up with science, and it tells us about God, things that are beyond the reach of science. But the Bible is not a science book. And that's worth mentioning, noting, and understanding. The point to it is that just because an idea is new does not mean that it's a good idea. And just because an idea is old doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad idea or a wrong idea. Old ideas can be correct ideas. And new ideas can be correct ideas. And both can be, and both can also be bad ideas. The age doesn't necessarily have anything to do with it. Not directly.
Atheism is probably older than Christianity.
To some degree.
At least the principles, I mean, or lack thereof, whatever you want to call it. I mean, atheism was around before, in the Old Testament.
Sure.
But wasn't Christianity
Yes.
As of about 2,000 years ago, yes.
okay?
Christianity as we understand it. Now, the roots go much further back to the beginning of time. But Christianity, in a sense, started after Christ came.
Does he mention Jeremiah 6:16, the verse we all know, thus saith the Lord, stand ye in the way and seek and ask for the old paths, where is the good way, and walk therein, and ye shall find rest for your souls.
He did not mention it, but it does prove the point. That there are some truths, particularly moral truths, that God revealed in days of old, that do not change.
Of course, the very last couple words is, we will not walk therein,
Right. So now Rushdoony gives his definition. He's going to tweak it a little bit. In a way, claiming that his definition is certainly more appropriate and perhaps older. I don't know that it's necessarily older. But he would say that anyone has the freedom to establish a school, to propagate his ideas, and to maintain that school without interference. So, whereas modern academic freedom places the right, that freedom, it bestows it to the individual professor, gives it to the faculty. Rushdoony would give it to the institution and the leaders of that institution, not necessarily to the faculty that are paid to teach it. Agree? Disagree? I think this is a more appropriate definition and understanding of what academic freedom ought to be.
If you started a school, you would get to choose what was taught and not the people who were teaching.
Correct. That is absolutely correct. John?
I'm not sure. If the Marquis de Sade wanted to establish a school, should society allow it?
Very good question.
Do we have the authority to not allow it? We as a society.
We as a society, if you're a godly society, you have godly laws and rules.
Right, that's the key right there.
And,
Godly society.
yeah,
Marquis de Sade would probably be doing some illegal activities
illegal based on
God's law, like it.
God's law, right?
But on a society's law too, I mean.
Yeah.
Sure.
Probably.
And that is another thing that Rushdoony does. He gives a caveat in his full definition of without interference so long as it's not breaking the law. And as I recall, he specifically mentions a
All right.
current legal system. But to your point, John, Rushdoony has some presuppositions in here that we also need to look at. The first one is that every philosophy, Marquis de Sade, every philosophy has an equal right to propagation.
Oh. He was a very wicked man
Yeah.
from France who enjoyed hurting people.
Really, really bad guy. So even in Rushdoony's own definition, there's a presupposition that every philosophy, every idea, every person who has an idea has an equal right to everyone else to propagate his idea, to propagate his philosophy, to spread his thought without qualification. Agree, disagree? Okay.
You're saying it doesn't depend on what the philosophy is, it doesn't matter what the.
He does not qualify it.
Okay, well, in biblical law, if somebody is coercing somebody to come worship an idol with them, that's stoning. I mean, you have to stone the guy.
But coercion is different than a philosophical.
Well, he's still spreading his idea to that person. Hey, I'm worshiping, you should come worship this idol with me, it's the right thing to do, So I guess, I don't know, I wouldn't necessarily agree with no qualification on the idea, but.
Well, it gets back to in a godly society.
Yeah.
Is it or isn't it?
And now you're talking about propagation versus statement. Every philosophy has an equal right to be stated, perhaps, but to be propagated, which means to be spread or multiplied, I don't think it has equal rights. I don't think it does.
Well, but then whose job is it to be
Police.
limiting it?
Yeah, police. Yeah, who are the thought police?
Right.
Yeah.
What, by what standard? How do we decide which ideas, which philosophies do have a right to be spread and
Right.
propagated, and which ones do not?
For example, like if Marquis decided to start a school, like in a God-honoring society, would it even be successful? You know,
Couldn't be, not if it was.
it couldn't be, you said? or-
It wouldn't be, or shouldn't, yeah.
Right.
You would think it wouldn't be in a godly society.
Right.
You'd like to think.
I would like to think that.
On the other hand, look around. We started as a godly society, and the Marquis de Sade would have been put in jail here, just like he was in France. I mean, if you get put in jail in France for ideas. Yeah, they're really nasty, right? True. Today, it could sit next to this school.
Right.
All right, and according to Rushdoony, it would have the same right to sit by this school and teach what it teaches.
You would probably try to destroy this school, but
Here's part of my fear in this kind of a presupposition. There's an implication that it's going to deny an absolute truth in favor of fairness. It would be fair to let the school of Marquis de Sade set up shop next door, because they all have this equal right. But in doing so, in allowing that, we are denying a fundamental truth. Life is not fair. Maybe I overstate that, but it's a fear of mine with this kind of a presupposition, and it also requires that Christians refrain from opposing pagan schools. If this stands true, then as Christians, do we have a right to oppose a pagan school?
I think we could still oppose it philosophically. It's just can't go break the windows out of it. I mean,
Okay. So there's a line there somewhere in how far we can go in opposition, or what type of opposition.
yeah.
Okay.
We have to be confident enough in our own philosophy that it's attractive enough and powerful enough to overcome the other philosophies.
Okay, so it's beating them at their own game.
Right,
Anyway.
that's the whole point of 2 Corinthians, where it says that our weapons are not carnal, but mighty for pulling down strongholds. It's the ideas that we have. It's the philosophy and the religion that we hold to that's more powerful than physical weapons, sticks and stones.
Okay.
So let me just throw this out. For some reason, when I'm reading this, I'm thinking that with all the influence and work that Rushdoony did for Christian schools and homeschoolers, I'm wondering if he's, in the back of his mind, not thinking that this statement is so Christian schools can propagate. You know what I mean?
So there may be an underlying presumption that we're not seeing here.
Well, I don't, just all the work that he did, remember?
Yeah.
Well, of course.
And
You know.
that's what makes this a concern of mine, not an absolute disagreement with.
Yeah.
Yeah, when Rushdoony was swimming in the sea of humanistic schools, and Christian schools were being persecuted, not just prosecuted.
Right.
And so, in that mindset, for him to say that, you're thinking, no, he's talking about establishing, the Christian schools have just an equal right.
Well, I'm thinking he,
Yeah,
that may be
Right, but
rattling
if
around
you
in
read
there
that,
somewhere.
you gotta take it for what it says.
Yeah.
and-
Right, and that's where the brevity of law and liberty may do us a little bit of disservice, because just by these chapters, we don't get a fuller view of Rushdoony's position. I think if you presented this to him in this discussion, he would probably disagree with this. But just based on what he writes in the book, this seems to underlie it. So another presupposition would be that every school has the right to operate without interference. And so it comes back to the same concern, same question. Would those schools have that right? Or should there be interference from godly men, godly society, and in what form? Stella?
I think if it's not a Christian school, we should oppose it. I don't know how.
Okay,
That's the point.
that's the point.
Seems to me if you have a means of interference or some sort of police, you're creating a way of a vulnerability in a Christian society where someone can take a top-down means of causing trouble. And also, is it not true that there are no people to police this with a biblical philosophy? There's only certain people's philosophy. So we can't just say, well, we're only going to allow them if they line up with biblical thought. There's no one who's qualified to make that determination.
I do know I could go break down the window. That would not refrain from violence.
I would not.
Oh, I think in a God, if it was a God-filled, God-honoring society, there would be, I think there would pop up private organizations that would go and peacefully oppose pagan schools that are popping up, you know what I mean?
So now we get into some authoritative questions in that.
Right, well, what do you mean, like authoritative questions?
Well, who has the authority to oppose? Private organizations would, but would a government, a local government say,
Oh,
let's say we had a local government that was controlled strictly by Christian men. Would that governing body have the authority to say, no, Marquis de Sade, you cannot set up a school in our town?
I would say yes, they would have that authority. But because we don't have Christian men running the school board and running the district township municipality, yeah, I don't have the same standard as you, Sid, so I'm going to approve Margaret's de Sade school. It all gets back to what's the standard.
Right.
I think if it's just Christian men, they should have the right and the authority that has been given them by the government to take care of that township or district.
But that becomes the question, does that governing authority include the right to tell someone that, no, you can't teach evil? You can't start a school that's going to teach evil. And so that's where it comes back to a question of authority. Who has the authority to oppose such a school?
Conrad's point from earlier, that if the school was violating the law, what are the laws?
Right.
And, what are the laws in place? And so we get back to an earlier discussion that we had, which is if you attack the foundations, and, how does the nation stand? So you have to defend your foundations, and you defend your foundations by disallowing certain things, by punishing certain things. So now you get back to godly laws. Now you get to Wes's point about, somebody who was recruiting idol worship, or for idol worship in the Old Testament, was taken out and stoned. In fact, if the town allowed it, the entire town was to be destroyed.
So it all intermingles. It all ties in.
Like, maybe you would have to let them set up the school, but you wouldn't be able to do anything until you walk into a classroom and see them teaching evil. You know what I mean? Then you would have, whatever, the eyewitnesses, and you would have everything you need to punish them, you know?
I think
I don't know.
would the governor of the state have the authority?
That's part of the question. Would the governor have that authority? Should he have that authority?
I think he should, because he's taking care of that state, so I think he should.
Part of the trouble is, what if it's a pagan governor, and then he decides to disallow Christian schools? Your point.
Well, I was wondering, okay, if you're, where are you gonna draw the line there then? Now, what if somebody's teaching concerning idol worship, but they're not, proselytizing? Or,
I guess I'm wondering how you teach it, but don't proselytize.
well, and if you say that, then where are you gonna draw the line of what ideas are, any false idea is ultimately an attack on Christianity and an attack on God. So, to teach any false idea would ultimately be, in God's eyes, a capital offense. As soon as you start getting into policing ideas, I don't see how you can.
Agreed.
It's tough.
Right. Who gets to decide? Who gets to set that standard? That becomes a very, very difficult question. One to which I do not expect to establish an answer today. So we want to ask the question, how does modern academic freedom work out in reality? And I think I have something that will show us how it does work out. But before we get there, going back to the definitions, this idea of academic freedom. First, is it a good idea? Is it a good presupposition to have? And second, who should have that right? Is that a right for individual professors to teach whatever they want, regardless of the institution's position, or is it the right of institutions to be established and propagate their ideas, expecting and enforcing their paid professors to also support those same ideas?
Institutions should have that choice. They're the people who started the school or are in charge of the school.
Right. I think there's an ownership issue in that too.
And why pay if you're not choosing what's teaching so that you can pay?
Any other thoughts on those two questions? Interestingly, it used to be the case at Liberty University, where I went to school, that there was no such thing as tenure. Everyone was on a year-to-year contract, every professor. And it was intended to supplant this idea of modern academic freedom. And they took some heat for it, saying you don't allow for academic freedom. You don't allow professors to preach their conscience. You restrain their research. I don't know if they have caved to that or not. But I do know that when I was there, that was the case, that there was no such thing as tenure.
Were there any professors that were fired or kicked out when you were there? Or were there? Okay.
Yeah, there were some that were kicked out, and I know of some who have been since, and some that were before. There were some that I thought should have been kicked out long before they were. There were a couple of professors that were getting very, very edgy. I don't know if they were removed or not, but I do know that the school maintained the authority to. When they decided to pull that trigger, the professors didn't have a legal leg to stand on because they were on an annual contract, there was no tenure concept in their contracts. But that was specifically to avoid this idea of having a school turned away from its foundations because of a professor's academic freedom. Were they right to do that?
We have academic freedom now.
I don't know. I don't know if they have this concept of academic freedom. They maintained, when Daddy was there, Rushdoony's definition of academic freedom, that the academic freedom belonged to the university, not to individual professors. So, something to chew on. Brings us to this question. How does it work out in reality? I want to show you a clip of a movie that came out, almost a decade ago now. But it had some merit to it. This is the trailer for it, but it does explain and express how much of this works. Last one fast.
Hello. You're probably wondering what I'm doing here. After all, even though I've done my time in the classroom as a student and as teacher, I'm better known as a writer, public speaker, social activist, game show host, even a speechwriter for Presidents Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford. Life has been very good to me, and I'm very grateful. Like most people, I also have questions, very big questions, like how did we get here? Where are we going? Is there a meaning and purpose in life? Or are we, the universe, everything in it, merely the result of pure dumb fate and chance? For most of my life, I believe the answers to these questions were fairly straightforward. Everything that exists was created by a loving God. That includes rocks, trees, animals, people, really everything. All along I've been well aware that other people, very smart people, believe otherwise. Rather than God's handiwork, they see the universe as the product of random particle collisions and chemical reactions. And rather than regard humankind as carrying the spark of the divine, they believe we're nothing more than mud animated by lightning. Somehow, that mud found a way to grow, reproduce, swim, crawl, breathe, walk, and eventually think. I have no problem if people want to believe that sort of thing. After all, we believe in a free society. This isn't Nazi Germany. People are entitled here to believe and say whatever they want about believing God and the development of life. At least, that's what I used to think. This is Dr. Richard von Sternberg, mild-mannered research scientist. Until 2005, He also edited a small scientific journal affiliated with the Smithsonian Institution in Washington until he published an article by this man. As a result, Dr. Sternberg quickly found himself the object of a massive campaign that smeared his reputation and came close to destroying his career.
After the publication of the Meyer article, the climate changed. It moved from being chilly to being outright hostile. Shunned, yes, and discredited. What I'm asking for is the freedom to follow the evidence wherever it leads.
What was so damning about this article? Nothing, as far as I could tell. It merely suggested that perhaps we aren't mud animated by lightning after all. Dr. Meyer argued that there are signs of intelligent design in nature. The digital code in our DNA could not have come about by accident. Instead of a cosmic mistake, he says the evidence seems to indicate that we are the product of a higher intelligence. Publishing Dr. Meyer's paper would not have been an issue if we were living in the time of Galileo or Einstein. But unfortunately for Dr. Sternberg, we live in a very different era. This is the era of Darwin, and in such an era, those who challenge the status quo seldom go unpunished. As I investigated this situation, I discovered Dr. Sternberg is far from alone. Many other scientists face similar persecution. They're losing their jobs, they can't get tenure, they're denied publication in scientific journals, and they're openly ridiculed and ostracized by their peers, all for questioning Darwin.
It's the kind of thing where you just learn to keep your mouth shut. I have been told to shut up.
We were accused of being diabolical, theocratic conspirators who were trying to force religion into the classroom.
It isn't just scientists attacking these guys either. The media's in on it, the courts, the educational system, everyone's after them. I guess I shouldn't be surprised. After all, these guys are asking some pretty dangerous questions, suggesting that Darwinism is not only improbable, it might actually be dangerous. I should know better than to ask such questions. After all, I've been warned.
On the whole, they're not scientists. Intelligent design is not a research program.
That's all popular, but
They're distracting you from what's important.
As a scientist, I am pretty hostile to a rival doctrine.
The more I thought about the situation, the more I wondered why we tolerate free speech in every other area of the society, but not here. What makes this situation so different? In my experience, people who are confident in their ideas are not afraid of criticism. So that tells me the Darwinists are afraid. They're hiding something.
We're so schizophrenic. We talk about things being designed and optimized, but then when you ask us, especially in public, we're all about defending neo-Darwinism.
I now realize it's my duty to get the word out, to warn others before it's too late. So I'm going to begin by warning you. Feel free to watch this film if you must, and I hope you do. But you've got to know that doing so could land you in a heap of trouble. Some of you are going to lose your friends for watching this film. Some of you may even lose your jobs. In fact, if you're a scientist with any hope of a future, I suggest you leave right now. College or high school students, especially teachers, legislators, journalists, anyone else with a stake in this debate should probably leave right now as well. But if you do leave, will anyone be left to fight this battle? Anyone? Anyone?
That's how academic freedom actually works out. It's one-sided. Ben Stein's not a Christian. He is a Jew. But he makes the point that in almost every other area, there's this idea of freedom of expression, not in academia. And honestly, we find it less and less in other spheres as well. Rushdoony makes the argument that modern academic freedom, the way it's used and defined today, is not freedom at all. It is slavery. It is totalitarianism, authoritarian. You have that academic freedom so long as you agree with the ones who hold that power. As long as you agree with the mainstream. Just like here, these professors that couldn't get tenure, that were denied publication, they weren't even going so far as to say God did it. They were just saying, look, Darwinism, as stated, is not probable. There's too much design element, stuff that can't be developed without intelligence, even in our own DNA. Because they make the suggestion, they don't get academic freedom. So the way it works out is absolutely one-sided. The wrong side. Any other thoughts, questions, comments? John?
One opponent of true academic freedom said, I find myself hostile to opposing doctrine. It's a religion, it's not science.
It is. It's fascinating because Dawkins is one of the leading scientists of our day. And he's speaking in religious terms.
He's the one who's constantly preaching that science has nothing to do with religion. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Anytime you get into right and wrong, you're into religion.
And they very much make it a matter of right and wrong.
Sure.
They use those terms.
Make up your mind, science
That's where you get into
or
the Sassoon.
religion.
That's where you get into the Sassoon. Absolutely.
Any other thoughts, questions, comments, concerns, rebuttals? Wes, would you mind closing us in a word of prayer? Sure.
Thank you for a beautiful fall day. Thank you for the discussions being held here in this church. And Lord, may they be honoring to you, Lord, and thought about through the next coming week, and the next coming couple weeks until the next Sunday school class. And I just pray for all of us in this room that we would think about and throw it up against your word, Lord, and see what you have to explain to us through your word, and base everything that we do on your word. And thank you for blessing us with the gift of thoughts and decision-making and intelligence, Lord. We give you all the glory and the praise. And bless this week, Lord, we pray in the name of Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much.